Hey everyone, here's 5 topics you have to think about before starting your next scraping project or automation project. Let's get straight into it. For the first topic, we're going to discuss saving your data. So what I mean by this is, where are you physically going to store the data that you've collected? Are you going to store it on your computer locally? Is that going to be in a CSV file or an Excel type file? Are you going to save it to a database that's hosted somewhere or again on your computer? And are you going to save it to a third-party service such as Google Sheets or Airtable directly? Then once you've determined that, you want to figure out, okay, what data are you going to store and that's necessary? So if you're saving it to Google Sheets, you're basically forced to use CSV or Excel. With that in mind, that can limit the way you store your data and the way you represent it. And then you have to think about, okay, what data is key? Because if you're saving it to Google Sheets, you probably don't want to save the entire HTML because that'll be very inefficient. So you want to keep key information. However, if you do want to save the entire HTML, maybe you do look at a different service or saving it to a database directly on your computer. So those are things you want to think about before the project even starts and as you're going through the website and figuring out what you even want to collect. And there's no necessarily right answer. It depends on the product to project, whether this is for you, whether you're collecting this data one time for a personal project, whether you're trying to sell this data, whether you need to scrape it multiple times for a client. It all depends on what the specific use case is, so just think through that. To give you an example, this is some data I'm collecting for a client. What I'm doing is I'm getting the data, I'm saving it to a CSV on my computer. Then what I do is I have a Python script that will go through that folder of all the collected data, put that into one bigger CSV file. I'm then going to filter and process it, and then I'm going to send it to him as an Excel file. So because he only needs this one time, I'm just going to save it all locally, collect all the data, clean it, send it to him as an Excel, and then delete it. That's what's going to work for this project. But if you have a project where you need to reference that old data, you should probably store it to Google Sheets or somewhere else in a database where you can refer to it. Or you could save it on your computer, but just put it on an external hard drive. But just think about where you want to save and store your data. Next is retry logic for specific HTTP codes. So what this means is when you're using the internet and you go to a website, there's a request being made between your computer and the server. The server communicates with your computer using these codes, basically saying, hey, everything's good, everything's not good. So if I go to google.com and I search for the definition of a word, I should get a 200 response. However, if I look for a word that doesn't exist, or maybe I'm on the New York Times and I'm trying to look for an article and I click on a link that my friend sent me, but they deleted that article, I'm gonna get a 404 not found, meaning that resource was not found. And these are just some other error codes, and the reason I bring this up is because your script should be able to handle these specific error codes because you should do different things. So for example, in my scripts, if I get that 401 not authenticated, that usually means I have to refresh my authentication token and get a new one. So the script should pause where it's at, get the new token, save that token, and then continue where it's left off. From what I've seen, I usually get the 403 in cases where a specific IP or instance has been rate limited, but I'm not signed in. So what that means is you can access the website without being signed in, but I got the 403 because I was going to it too often. So if you're signed in and you're using an API based on their documentation and you're not like scraping the data, you can get a rate limit when you're going too fast. So for example, Google Sheets has a rate limit, I think, of about 300 writes per second. So that means I can only write to 300 cells per second. So if I go faster than that, if I try to do 305, the request is going to get blocked and the status could be 429. So my script needs to be able to handle that, or just knowing that they have that rate limit through their documentation, I just only limit it to only be 250 per second. And then finally, there's the 500 internal error. Oftentimes you'll see this when an API is down, a service is down, or your request was really badly formatted. So if you get the 500, I would first check that you're accessing the right endpoint and that you're sending the request properly. And then if those two are not working and the API was working before, that usually just means the service is down. So I would check the website and I would check the down status of the service. And what I mean by checking the status of the service is a lot of these APIs, they have a status website. So this is the OpenAI API status page. So you can see that the APIs have 99.6%, 68% uptime, which just means that basically most of the year it's available. But as you can see, at different times throughout this past year, it's had issues. So if you were using the API on July 10th, you probably ran into some issues, but if you're using it today, no incidents, so everything should be all good. All right, so the next topic is proxies and rate limiting. Kind of touched on this a little bit before, but essentially what this is hiding your requests or using a different IP for your request so you don't get blocked. And the reason for this is because if you're going to a service, let's say 1,000 times per minute, that's going to look very fishy, and companies are catching on to what people are doing. So most likely what they're going to do is going to block your IP, and you're no longer going to be able to access the website. You can get around this in a very basic way of like using a hotspot on your phone, but that's not very scalable. So oftentimes what you have to do is use a service that provides proxies. So to give you as an example, this is the service that I use, and I have a referral code down in the description. So if you use my code, you benefit, I benefit, we all win. But essentially what this service does is they provide proxies for me to use, and there's 3 different types of proxies. There's data center, residential, and there's also mobile proxies. Residential is usually the go-to because you get the best bang for your buck. So it's not too expensive, but they're also super reliable. So you could get that for $1.50 per gigabyte, and so that's really reliable through this service. And essentially what this does is when you're making a request, instead of having your home IP address go directly to the service, you're now doing your home IP address to this proxy, which then goes to the service. So you're essentially, imagine putting your mask on your face and going back into a store. Now it's going to be harder to know that it's you. And with that, you also have to make sure there's some other things that you're doing. So it's not just proxies, you also have to make sure that your headers are aligned. You're using packages such as curl_cffi, which I've discussed in a different video, which allows you to impersonate Chrome more closely to avoid getting those rate limits. You're also reading the documentation and making sure you're not hitting those rate limits. So if you are scraping and you're not using the official documentation, you kind of have to play around and figure out what the official or unofficial rate limit is. So usually you want to start off slowly increase until you hit the rate limit, and then slowly decrease again until you're at a spot where you're going fast enough, but you're also not hitting that rate limit. Next key aspect is logging and keeping track of progress of your program. Things can go wrong. Sometimes there's just a bug in your code which leads to the script ending early. Sometimes your internet disconnects. Sometimes I accidentally just close my laptop when a program is running. So it's really important, whatever happens, that you have logging and you keep track of progress. To show you an example of what this means, I have my terminal pulled up. This is Warp, the terminal I use, like an AI terminal, but that's besides the point. So here we have, and there's a lot going on, but I'll walk you through the key details. Essentially, I had multiple browsers running, and they're each outputting different parts of the scraping. So this first browser got the details for the specific case. This is case 152 out of 152, and it's saving it to a CSV. It's saying the scraping is completed, and it completed all those pages, and then it closed this web driver or that specific browser. And it's also saying that it completed processing this query for that data. And overall, 3 out of the 4 queries that I put in, or 3 out of the 4 browsers that I put in, have finished. And the reason that this is important is because imagine I have those 4 browsers open on my computer, and then I see 3 of them close. I'd be confused, I'd be worried if I wasn't logging. But since I'm logging, I can look at my terminal, I can see, oh, those 3 finished processing the data that they had to process. So everything's all good. If I was going through my logs and I see that, oh, this specific data term that I looked up, there was an error and that the data wasn't saved, I can go back and rerun the script for that specific issue and go and collect that data. Or if I run it again and it doesn't work, I can see, oh, okay, that specific search term doesn't exist and I need to update that and fix that. So this is why logging is important. You make sure that you're getting the correct data, you're making sure that everything's working, and you're most importantly, you're making sure you're not missing anything important. So the next really important part of web scraping is multi-threading and async. As I've discussed in other videos, this can greatly speed up your scripts and your web scraping. However, you want to make sure that when you're doing this, you're doing thread-safe operations and you have lock-in code. If you have no idea what that means, essentially just means that because you'll have multiple different threads or workers accessing the same file or accessing the same database, you want to be making sure that only one can do one operation at a time. So imagine you have 4 workers and you have 1 file on your computer. You don't want all 4 to be able to access and write to the document at the same time, because that can cause improperly formatted documents or even corrupt the document. So you want to make sure that the document can only be accessed by 1 thread at a time. It saves it, then the next document can access it, and so on and so forth. I can make a more dedicated video on that if you guys are interested. Another aspect to keep in mind when multi-threading and async is because you're going faster and you may have multiple workers going to a website or going to an API at the same time, you might run into rate limits. That's happened a few times to me, where when you have one thread or one worker going, no rate limit issues. But once you have 4 going at the same time, you may start running into that. So just keep that in mind and make sure that you're still being respectful to the website, to the API, and you're not like sending thousands of requests at the same time to the API or to the website, because you may even take it down by accident. So just be careful of that and make sure you're doing it respectfully. And then finally, we have probably the most important question, and extra 6th bullet point is that's how you set up your scraper. You have request, you have headless, and you have headful. So you can either do purely request based, so you send a request to an API, that's the best, or you send a request to the website and you're able to collect the data. You have headless, which is when your script opens a browser, but it doesn't open the browser directly like you're seeing in this interface. Like right now I have the browser open, so there's a way for Selenium and other web drivers to open the browser but not display it, and this is oftentimes much faster because you don't have the overhead and the RAM usage of opening up a physical browser. And then the last option is actually opening up the full browser and you can see what the script is doing. This is very useful for debugging, and you should try to do headless if possible or request based if possible, because that's the best and most reliable. However, I have run into a few cases where to just get the work done and all I could do was headful, so that's okay. But if possible, I would say it's this order of try to do a request, then headless, then headful. So yeah, that's the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like, subscribe. If you want to work with me, you can book a call with me down in the description. And if you guys think I missed anything, let me know down in the comments. See you guys in the next one.